Dr. Aria Quinn moved down the narrow metal corridors of the spaceship, her steps measured, her mind drawn to the signals they detected only days before. After decades of silence from the galaxy, the brief, irregular flickers had seemed like a revelation. Now, the mission she led had become an obsession, not just for her, but for the entire crew of the Viridian. They traveled light years from Earth to this cold, unremarkable corner of space, yet something here felt profoundly wrong. A dark edge gnawing at the very sense of discovery that had launched their expedition. The planet they'd landed on was hollowly silent, barren, pockmarked with abandoned cities whose designs felt disorientingly advanced and alien. The first thing that struck Aria was the absence of life. Not a skeleton, not a trace of death, not even the kind of organic material one would expect from a civilization's passing. It was as if they'd simply decided one day to walk away. The beacon, embedded deep within a crumbling structure, was still active, emitting faint, shivering pulses of energy. Its signals were weak, but they carried a peculiar frequency that the crew hadn't encountered before, a frequency that drew them deeper into the planet's secrets, as though whispering answers while keeping them hidden. After days of fruitless decoding, Aria finally deciphered fragments of the glyphs surrounding the beacon. The words silence and stay unseen appeared frequently, along with depictions of beings with hollow, empty faces, each meticulously etched as if drawn in fear. Each time she reviewed them, Aria felt her skin grow cold, like an instinctual warning she couldn't shake. The first night after finding the beacon, the whispers began. Faint at first, like static from a distant radio, the voices hummed through the ship's communications system. Aria dismissed it as interference until the whispers grew into words that clawed at the mind, strange fragments and phrases that felt like they were being spoken directly into her thoughts. The crew, once jovial, became insular, speaking in low tones, casting furtive glances as though afraid their own words might give them away. The worst was the lingering sense that they weren't alone, that something moved just beyond the edge of light, watching from the shadows. By the second week, Aria's first officer, Commander Reese, disappeared. One moment, he was working alongside her on translations, and the next, he was simply gone, leaving his datapad and gear behind, as if he'd stepped out for a breath of fresh air in the middle of an alien desert. His voice echoed faintly over the comm system, a single repeated phrase, "They are here, they are here." The whispers grew bolder, louder, feeding off the mounting fear among the crew. Aria's own sleep dwindled to a few desperate hours snatched here and there, her dreams haunted by shifting shadows and faceless figures watching her from across a gulf of blackness. Yet she forced herself back to the beacon, trying to wring answers from the incomplete language, the guttural glyphs that felt more like warnings scratched by a desperate hand than a language meant to communicate. She didn't notice at first, but the structure around her, the walls, the ceiling, the very ground underfoot was subtly changing. Surfaces shifted when she looked away, and the inscriptions seemed to grow more frantic, more desperate. "Do not speak," they said. "Do not see it." One night, as the crew dwindled to half its original number, Dr. Quinn found the final message, a warning buried beneath layers of protective seals, almost as if the very act of hiding it was meant to protect those who came across it. It knows when you understand. To see it is to call it. She stood frozen, the truth dawning with a chill that went down to her bones. They hadn't simply stumbled upon a lost civilization. They'd walked into a trap, a vacuum created by a horror that moved without movement, that lived without form. The reason the aliens had gone silent, the reason they had erased themselves, was because they'd learned that anything, even thought itself, was enough to summon it. The realization hit too late. The beacon pulsed again, but it wasn't simply emitting its signal this time. It was drawing energy from the Viridian. The lights on the ship dimmed, and an oppressive silence filled the halls. The whispers coalesced into something larger, no longer words, but a collective consciousness, a presence that seemed to fold itself over and around the crew, drawing their thoughts into its hungry silence. Aria felt herself pulled in, her own mind going quiet like she was being swallowed whole by the darkness. Then, She heard Reese's voice again. "We are all here now, Dr. Quinn." But it was not Reese. It was something that wore his voice like a cloak, his consciousness erased, his memories borrowed by the force that moved within the silence. Arya's terror locked her in place as she realized what had happened to her missing crew. They were not gone, they were consumed. Their identities shredded and incorporated into the very fabric of the thing that surrounded her. The walls began to warp and pulse, like the planet itself was breathing in response to her fear, feeding off her awareness. The more she understood, the stronger it became. This was its nature, a creature of pure knowledge, a being that preyed on understanding itself. It did not exist in the way life forms did. It lived within the very fabric of awareness, slipping into thoughts, breeding in the terror of those who recognized it. In a moment of desperate clarity, Arya realized the full horror. The dark force wasn't a physical entity, nor was it an external threat to be fought. It was an idea, a self-sustaining parasite of consciousness. Every crew member who had come to understand it had unknowingly opened themselves to its influence. And now, she too had seen it, thought of it, and in so doing, had opened a doorway. Her last hope, however slim, lay in containment. Arya sealed herself in the communication bay, overriding the system to transmit a single final message to Earth, a warning buried in coded layers, as cryptic as the glyphs she had so painstakingly translated. Her words were disjointed, half lost to static, but they carried her final plea: stay silent, do not seek, do not understand. She could feel it closing in, a shadow of thoughts slipping into her own mind, a whisper coiling around her memories, feeding on her fear. As her consciousness faded into the darkness, her last fleeting thought was of Earth, the innocent explorers who would come after her, unaware of the trap, unknowingly calling it closer. The transmission ended, her warning sealed in the silence of space. Somewhere, light years away, the beacon pulsed again, but this time it pulsed with the knowledge, waiting to reach the next consciousness, waiting to be seen. In that silence, the dark force had already begun its journey back toward Earth.